The straight razor felt cold against Clara Whitmore's neck. She didn't flinch. She held her breath, grabbed a thick handful of her long, dark hair, and she cut. The strands fell to the marble tile. They looked like severed silk, dead on the cold floor. She cut again, and again. The woman staring back at her from the gilded mirror started to look like a stranger. Her jaw looked sharper, her eyes looked hollow, and for the first time in her life she looked free. It was midnight. The massive Whitmore estate was silent, sleeping around her, heavy with the smell of old money and imported rugs. 23 years. 23 years she had lived in this beautiful, suffocating cage. Tonight, she was walking out. She packed a simple canvas bag. Inside, she stuffed a plain housemaid's dress, a pair of thick wool stockings, and worn-out boots she'd stolen from the servants' quarters. She packed a loaf of bread and a small knife. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a newspaper clipping. She'd hidden that clipping for 2 long years. The headline was simple: Local rancher rescues traveler from blizzard. Survivor unnamed. Her father had paid the newspaper editor to bury the story. He'd paid the doctor to keep his mouth shut. He had paid everyone he could to make them forget it ever happened. But Clara remembered. Oh, she remembered. She remembered strong, calloused hands pulling her from a snowdrift that was supposed to be her grave. She remembered a rough, low voice cutting through the blinding whiteout. "Don't you die on me. Not tonight." She remembered waking up, not in silk sheets, but in a small, rough-hewn cabin. She was bandaged. She was warm. A weathered man with the most tired eyes she'd ever seen was feeding her broth. He didn't ask her a single question. Not her name. Not where she was from. Not her station. Nothing. For 3 days, that stranger had saved her life. And then, on the 4th day, her father's men arrived. They came with a private doctor and a closed carriage, and they took her away. They treated her like stolen property being returned to its owner. She'd been too weak to speak, too delirious with fever to protest. But she heard her father's voice in the hallway, sharp and cold. "Never mention this. Associating with that kind of frontier trash ruins her prospects." Frontier trash, the man who had saved her life. Clara stood in her marble bathroom and touched the scar on her shoulder. The frostbite had healed, crooked, ugly. It was the only proof she had that any of it was real. She lit a match. She held the flame to the newspaper clipping. The paper curled, turned black at the edges, then glowed a dull, angry orange. She watched it burn until it was nothing but ash in a porcelain sink. Then she took a sheet of her father's expensive, cream-colored stationery and wrote a note. Just 7 words. "I'm finding what you tried to bury." The pre-dawn cold was a slap to her face as she walked down the long cobblestone drive. Behind her, the mansion blazed with gaslight. It looked like a monument to a life built on cruelty and control. She didn't look back, not even once. At the train station, she bought a ticket west. She used money she'd stolen from her father's desk, bills he kept for poker games. The clerk barely glanced at her chopped hair and plain dress. Good. She wasn't Clara Whitmore anymore. She was no one. And being no one meant she could finally be anyone. The train whistle screamed. She stepped aboard, heading toward the only kindness she had ever known. The supply wagon left her at the edge of nowhere. Clara stood in ankle-deep mud, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and stared at the ranch that had haunted her dreams for 2 years. It was smaller, so much smaller than she remembered. The cabin was weather-beaten, listing to one side. The fence posts were crooked. The barn door hung off one hinge, swaying in the wind. And there was a half-finished addition jutting from the cabin's east side. It was just raw timber, covered in a torn canvas tarp that snapped and popped in the wind like a flag of defeat. In the distance, a man worked. He was alone, pounding new fence posts into the frozen ground. Broad shoulders, a worn hat pulled low. He moved with a steady, desperate rhythm. The rhythm of someone who had forgotten how to stop, because stopping meant thinking. Her throat tightened. It was him. She forced her feet to move. Her boots sank into the melting snow and mud with every step. The sound was wet, ugly. When she reached him, he didn't even look up, just kept hammering. Pound, pound, pound. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The hammering stopped. He paused, then slowly glanced at her. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, lined deep at the corners with sun and grief. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. Why would he? The last time he'd seen her, she was swollen, half dead, her face blistered by frostbite. She'd been unconscious most of those 3 days. And now, her hair was shorn like a boy's. Her face was smudged with soot from the train. "Can you work?" he asked, his voice exactly as she remembered it. "Or are you running from something?" Low, careful, tired. "Both," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Name's James McKenzie. This is my land." He gestured at the failing ranch with the heavy hammer. "It's not much. I can offer you a spot in the barn. 1 meal a day. No pay. Not till you prove yourself." "I can prove myself. We'll see." He handed her an axe and pointed at a massive pile of logs. "Split that cord." Her hands, soft from 23 years of needlepoint and piano lessons, blistered within the first 10 swings. By the 20th, the blisters had torn open. Blood seeped through her palms, making the axe handle slick. But she didn't stop. She split every single log in that pile. Her arms screamed. Her back felt like it was on fire. When she finished, hours later, she set the axe down, her hands shaking so badly she could barely open them. She met his gaze. He nodded. "Just once. Barn's yours. Supper's at sundown." That evening she watched him through the cabin window. He cooked a simple stew over the iron stove. It was the same table, the same chair, the exact room where she had woken up, bandaged and saved. He stepped out onto the porch. "You coming in or not?" She followed him inside. The cabin was clean, but empty. It felt hollowed out. He ladled stew into 2 tin bowls and slid one across the table to her. He handed her a spoon. As he did, his rough fingers brushed against her palm. He froze. He frowned, his eyes locked on her hand. He stared at it for a heartbeat too long, a flicker of deep confusion in his eyes. "Something wrong?" she asked, her own heart stopping. He shook his head, pulling his hand back. "No, just thought I recognized." He trailed off. He turned back to his bowl. Never mind. They ate in silence. The stew was simple. Potatoes, carrots, a little salted pork. It tasted like forgiveness. When she returned to the barn that night, she curled into a pile of hay and finally wept. He didn't remember her face. He didn't remember her at all. But his hands remembered. She'd seen it in that pause, that flicker of a memory he couldn't place. "He saved my life," she whispered into the darkness. "And I'm lying to him." But what choice did she have? If she told him the truth, he wouldn't see her. He'd see Clara Whitmore, the heiress, the burden, the girl whose rich father had called him frontier trash. He'd see everything she was trying to escape, so she would keep lying. For now. Outside, the wind howled. Spring was trying to come, but winter wasn't finished yet. 1 week passed, then 2. Clara, no, Elena, she had to remember, Elena Carter, worked from the moment the sun rose until her muscles gave out. She mucked stalls until her back seized. She hauled water from the creek until her shoulders burned. She mended tack with clumsy fingers that slowly, painfully, learned how to be useful. Her hands turned to leather. The city's softness was burned away by lye soap and rope burns. James watched her. He watched her with a quiet suspicion that, day by day, softened into something else. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was less doubt. In the evenings they sat by the fire in the cabin. The silence between them grew comfortable, like worn leather. He would carve new handles for his tools. She would patch his work shirts, her stitches small and neat. "Why do you work alone?" she asked him one night. The question just slipped out. He didn't answer right away. He just kept carving, the knife moving slow and steady. Shavings curled at his feet. Finally, he spoke to the fire. "My wife, Sarah, she died 3 winters ago." Clara's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. "I'm sorry. I was out checking trap lines," he said, his voice flat, distant, dead. "Gone 4 days. Came home to her grave. Neighbors buried her. Pneumonia took her fast." He set the knife down. "I should have been here." Clara understood that kind of guilt. It lived in her too. The shame of surviving when someone else didn't. The feeling of owing a debt you could never, ever repay. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to say, I know what it's like." Instead, she said, "You can't blame yourself for being gone." "Can't I?" He finally looked at her, and his eyes were hollow. "She needed me. I wasn't here. That's the only fact that matters." Clara's chest ached. The truth was right there, sitting on her tongue. "I'm the girl you saved, the one from the blizzard." But fear choked the words. What if he saw her as just another person who'd let him down? A wealthy girl playing dress-up, lying to his face. "You ask a lot of questions, Elena," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "But you give sad answers." He looked at her across the firelight. Something shifted in his expression. It was that flicker again, that nagging curiosity. "Have we met before?" he asked. Her heart stopped. It just stopped. "No, never." He nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on her, searching her face. "You remind me of someone," he said, more to himself than to her. "Someone I can't quite remember." He turned back to his carving. "Probably no one." That night, back in the barn, Clara wrote in a small hidden journal by candlelight. "He doesn't remember my face, but I remember his hands. They were the first kind thing I ever knew." Outside, the snow was melting in thick, dirty rivulets. Icicles dripped from the eaves. Spring was coming, unstoppable and dangerous. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the truth was thawing out too. She closed the journal. In the darkness, she could almost pretend. She could pretend she was just Elena Carter, an orphan, a nobody, starting a new life. But pretending wouldn't hold forever. Lies never did. She pulled an old coat tight around her shoulders. It was one James had given her, left on a peg in the barn. It was too large, but warm. It smelled like wood smoke and, faintly, like lavender. It must have been Sarah's. A fresh wave of guilt washed over her. She was wearing a dead woman's coat, lying to a grieving man. "He'll hate me when he finds out," she whispered. "But at least I'll have had this 1 week of being seen as human." She closed her eyes and listened to the wind. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howled. Spring was coming, and so was the reckoning. Mid-March brought the mud. The ground turned into a thick, clinging soup. The creeks swelled, and the cattle had to be moved to higher pasture before the lower fields flooded. Clara saddled her horse, a calm, steady mare James had given her, and rode beside him into the hills. The work was brutal. The cattle were spooked by the rushing water and the smell of the thaw. They scattered, and Clara's thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Her shoulders ached from roping strays. But she didn't complain. She didn't even think about it. She just rode, driving the herd with the same grim determination she'd used to split that first cord of wood. And then, the fence broke. A rotten post snapped under the pressure of the herd, and 6 head of cattle bolted. They ran straight for a deep ravine, a sheer drop hidden by the spring growth. "Damn it," James cursed, kicking his horse into a full gallop. Clara didn't wait. She followed, heart pounding in her throat. She cut in front of the lead steer, right in its path. She waved her hat, screaming until her voice cracked. The animal veered, confused by the noise and motion. The others followed it. Disaster averted. James reined up beside her, his horse breathing hard. He was breathing hard. "You ride like you were born to it," he said, staring at her. She forced a shaky smile. "Beginner's luck." That wasn't luck. His eyes narrowed. The suspicion was back, colder this time. Where'd an orphan girl from here and there learn to ride like that? Her stomach dropped. "Odd jobs," she said, the lie feeling thin. "Worked on a horse farm once. Just picked it up." He didn't press her. But the seed of doubt had taken root. She could see it. That evening, the tension was thick. He taught her to tie a Honda knot, the loop used for roping. His hands guided hers, rough, calloused palms over her own blistered fingers. The air in the cabin thickened. She could smell the wood smoke on his clothes and the soap on his skin. "A good knot," he said, his voice quiet. "Holds when everything else fails." Their eyes met and held. For a long, breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. You're learning fast." "I had a good teacher," she whispered. The moment was broken by the rattle of a wagon. A traveling merchant, a man named Josiah, pulled up the drive. He climbed down, tipping his hat. "Afternoon, McKenzie." "Josiah," James nodded. The merchant's eyes landed on Clara. His friendly smile faltered. He squinted. "Well now," he said, "don't suppose you're from back east, miss?" Clara's blood went cold. "No, sir. Born and raised in the territories." "Huh." He kept squinting at her, tilting his head. "You just look mighty familiar. Sure I haven't seen you in Boston. Or New York, maybe." "Never been," she said, her voice even, level. James stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Clara and the merchant. "She works for me, Josiah. Anything else you need?" The merchant shook his head, but his gaze lingered on Clara for 1 second too long. No, just thought, well, never mind." He climbed back onto his wagon and rattled away. When the dust settled, James turned to her. His face was hard. "You in trouble, Elena?" She met his eyes, and she lied again. "Not anymore." He wanted to believe her. She could see it in the way his jaw relaxed, just a fraction. But that night, Clara lay in the barn, staring at the rafters. The lie was unraveling, thread by thread, and she had no idea how to stop it. Late March brought a vicious cold snap, winter's last angry breath. Wolves, desperate and hungry, came down from the mountains. Clara woke to howling. It wasn't distant, it was sharp, and it was close. She grabbed a pitchfork and ran from the barn toward the cabin. James was already outside, his rifle in hand. "Stay behind me," he ordered. They moved toward the livestock pen. Eyes glowed in the darkness, dozens of them, like copper coins floating in the black. 6, maybe 7 wolves circled the fence, testing it for weakness. James fired once. The shot cracked through the night. The pack scattered, but they didn't flee. They were too hungry. Clara waved her arms, shouting. The wolves just paced, growling low in their chests. Then one lunged. It came over the fence in a blur of gray fur and white teeth. It didn't go for the sheep. It went straight for Clara. She stumbled back, dropping the pitchfork. "Clara!" James shouted. Wait. What did he call her? There was no time to think. James was there, tackling her sideways. They both hit the frozen mud, hard, just as the wolf snapped at the air where her throat had been. He fired the rifle again, from the ground. The sound was deafening. The wolf yelped, a high-pitched scream, and limped away. The rest of the pack vanished into the trees. Clara lay in the mud, heart hammering against her ribs, with James on top of her. He was staring down at her, breathing hard. His hand was on her shoulder, the scarred one. His thumb pressed against the puckered, crooked skin of the old frostbite. She saw it happen. She saw the exact moment recognition finally clicked into place. His eyes widened. The confusion vanished, replaced by a cold, shocking certainty. "Have we met before?" he asked again. But this time it wasn't a question. "No," she whispered, but it was a pathetic, weak sound. "That scar," he said, his thumb tracing it through her thin shirt. I've seen it. I bandaged it." "You just saved my life," she said quickly, desperately. "Maybe that's what you're feeling." He didn't move. He just kept staring at her shoulder, his mind clearly working, putting the pieces together. The girl from the blizzard, the ride, the Eastern-sounding voice. Finally, he pushed himself off her and helped her up. His touch was cold. They went back to the cabin. Dawn was creeping through the windows, gray and miserable. He made coffee. His hands were shaking, but she wasn't sure if it was from the adrenaline or from anger. "You scared?" he asked. "Terrified," she said, her voice shaking too. "Of losing this." He looked at her. "Losing what?" "You," she thought. "This is the first time I've ever felt worth something," she said instead. His expression softened just for a second. He handed her a tin mug of coffee. Their fingers touched, lingered. "You're not like anyone I've ever known, Elena," he said. Oh, she wanted to scream the truth. "I'm Clara Whitmore. You saved me 2 years ago. I came back because you're the only person who ever saw me as human." Instead, she just said, "Thank you." They sat in silence, watching the sun come up. When she left the cabin, her handkerchief slipped from her pocket. A small, linen square. She didn't notice. James found it an hour later, lying on the floor. In the corner, stitched in fine blue thread, were 2 letters. C.W. Elena Carter, or Clara Whitmore. He stared at the cloth. His mind was racing. The scar, the writing, the merchant's questions. And now this. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He said nothing, but the seed of doubt had just become a tree. And truth, once it starts to grow, can't be stopped. 2 riders appeared at noon. Clara was in the barn, brushing down the mare. When James called her name, his voice was tight, like a wire. "Elena, get out here." She stepped out into the weak sunlight. 2 men sat on horseback. They were well-dressed in city clothes, but they had hard eyes. Hired men. Investigators. "Afternoon," the taller one said, his eyes flicking from James to Clara and back again. "We're looking for a missing woman. Young, dark hair, early 20s. Seen anyone like that pass through?" James's jaw tightened. "No." "You sure? There's a reward." The man pulled a folded paper from his coat. "A big one. $5,000. Clara's heart stopped. James took the paper. He unfolded it slowly. He read it. She watched his face go pale. She watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped the paper. The description matched her exactly. And at the bottom, the name. Clara Whitmore, daughter of Boston industrialist Richard Whitmore. The men tipped their hats. "If you see her, send word to the sheriff in town. We'll be back to check." They rode off. James stood frozen, staring at the notice. The paper fluttered in his hand. Then, very slowly, he turned to Clara. "Who?" he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Are you?" She couldn't speak. Her throat closed. "Who are you?" he repeated, louder this time, taking a step toward her. "James. Your name, your real name. Say it." "Clara," she whispered. Her voice broke. "Clara Whitmore." He staggered back, just a step, like she'd struck him. "You lied. I had to. You lied to my face, every day, every—" He crumpled the $5,000 reward notice in his fist. "Why? Because you saved my life." The words tore out of her, desperate and raw. 2 years ago. That blizzard, that was me. You pulled me from the snow. You kept me alive for 3 days. And my father took me away, and he called you trash. He buried the story. He made sure you'd never be thanked, never be paid. And I... So this was guilt, he said, his voice shaking with a cold fury. Pity, pity for the poor dumb rancher. No, it wasn't pity. I came because you were the only person who ever saw me as human. Not as a name, not as a fortune. Just me. And you didn't even know who I was. And you thought lying was the way to prove that. He was shouting now. She reached for him. "James, please." He recoiled, stepping back as if her touch would burn him. "I don't need your charity, Clara. I don't need your guilt. And I sure as hell don't need you. James, I'm not. Get out." Her world stopped. "What?" "Get out." He pointed toward the road. "Go back to your mansion. Go back to your father. Go back to whatever life you thought you could escape by playing at being poor." Tears blurred her vision, hot and angry. "That's not why I came. That's not what this is. I don't care why you came." He turned his back on her. "You lied. That's all I need to know." He walked into the cabin and slammed the door. The sound echoed across the ranch. Clara stood alone in the mud, shaking. Rain began to fall, cold, relentless. She moved toward the barn, but not to pack. She wasn't leaving. She'd come too far. She'd burned every bridge. She had nothing to go back to, and this man, this angry, broken man, was the only thing in her life that had ever felt real. Even if he hated her, even if she'd ruined everything. She wasn't leaving. Clara refused to go. She stayed in the barn. She worked alone in the cold spring rain. She fixed the fences James had neglected, the ones that were falling apart. She repaired the broken wagon wheel he'd left to rot by the woodpile. And then she started on the cabin's addition, the one he'd abandoned after Sarah died. Every morning she was out there, hammering boards into place. Every evening she was on the roof, patching the holes in the tarp, then replacing it with shingles she'd acquired from a derelict shed down the road. She didn't speak to him. He didn't speak to her. But he watched. From the cabin window, he watched her. He watched this city girl, this heiress, work with a grim, silent fury he'd never seen in anyone. He was torn between his rage at her lie and something else, something that looked a lot like awe. One night he found Sarah's journal in an old trunk. He sat by the fire and read the last entry, written just days before she died. "If I go, James, don't let the guilt keep you from living. Don't close the door. Let someone in. Promise me. Promise me you'll let someone in." He closed the book, and for the first time since she died, he wept. The next morning, the investigators returned. This time they weren't alone. They brought the town sheriff. "We need to search your property, McKenzie," the sheriff said, his voice polite but firm. "We have reason to believe the missing girl is here." James's blood went cold. If they took Clara, she'd be dragged back to Boston. She'd be locked away, silenced, lost forever. And despite everything, despite the lies, despite the betrayal, he couldn't let that happen. "She's not here," he said, his voice flat. "Then you won't mind if we look." The lead investigator started to dismount. James stepped in front of the barn door. "I do mind." The investigators moved their hands toward their guns. The sheriff frowned. "James, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm here." The voice came from behind the barn. Clara appeared. She'd heard everything. She walked forward, a hammer still in her hand. She was covered in sawdust and mud. "I'm here," she said again, her voice quiet but carrying. James turned. "Clara, don't." "I won't let you lie for me," she said. She faced the sheriff. "I'm Clara Whitmore, but I'm not going back." The lead investigator smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "That's not your choice, miss." "Yes," Clara said, "it is." She set the hammer down. "I'm of legal age. I have broken no laws. You cannot force me to go anywhere." The sheriff hesitated. "Your father." "My father has no claim on me," she said, her voice steady now, hard as steel. "I renounce my inheritance. I renounce my name. This is my home." James stared at her, just stared. She turned to him, and now the tears were streaming down her face, cutting paths through the grime. "I know you don't trust me. I know I lied. But I also kept my word. I worked. I earned my place here. And I'm not leaving. Not unless you throw me out yourself." The silence was deafening. Then James moved. He stepped to her side. He stood right next to her, facing the sheriff. "She stays." The investigators bristled. "You're harboring." "I'm protecting a free woman," James's voice was iron. "She's made her choice. Unless you've got legal grounds to take her against her will, you're trespassing." The sheriff looked at the investigators. He looked at Clara, at her defiant, tear-streaked face. He looked at James, standing guard. Finally, he nodded. "No law says we can take her against her will. She's of age." The investigators cursed, but they mounted their horses. "Your father will hear about this, Miss Whitmore." "Good," Clara shouted back. "Tell him I'm dead to him, because he's been dead to me for years." They rode off, kicking up mud. When the dust settled, Clara turned to James. Her whole body was shaking. "Thank you." He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. "You should have told me the truth from the start." "I know." "I still don't trust you." "I know." He looked past her, at the cabin's completed addition. The new roof was solid. The walls were straight. You finished it." "You couldn't," she said simply. "So I did." Something in his expression finally broke. The anger, the grief, it just shattered. "Why?" "Because you saved my life," she said, her voice soft. "And I'm trying to save yours." He reached out and took her hand, the one with the blisters and scars. She took his. They just stood there, muddy and exhausted, as the spring rain started to fall again, washing the ground clean. The next morning, her father arrived. Richard Whitmore came in a black carriage, pulled by 4 horses, with 2 armed men riding alongside and a lawyer inside. He climbed down, his polished shoes somehow avoiding the mud. He stared at Clara, at her shorn hair, her dirty work clothes, her calloused hands, like she was a stranger, like she was something disgusting. "Clara, get in the carriage." "No." "This is absurd," he sneered. "You've been living in squalor with this rancher. You've lost your mind. Do you have any idea the scandal you've caused?" James stepped forward. "She's not your prisoner, Whitmore. She's a free woman." "You..." Her father jabbed a finger at James. "You kidnapped my daughter. You poisoned her mind. I'll see you hanged for this." "He didn't kidnap me," Clara said, her voice loud and clear. "I came here on my own, and I'm staying." "I'll disinherit you. You'll have nothing." "Good," Clara said. "I never wanted your money. I wanted a father." Her father's lawyer cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Whitmore is of legal age, sir. Legally. Our grounds are non-existent." "I don't care about grounds," her father roared. "She is my daughter." "No." Clara's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air. "I was your property. There's a difference." From the road, townspeople had gathered. They'd seen the fancy carriage. The town elder, a white-haired man named Moses, stepped forward. "Seems to me the lady's made her choice, Mr. Whitmore," Moses said, his voice calm. "And unless you've got a legal claim, you're just making noise on another man's land." Richard Whitmore looked around. He saw the hard faces of the townspeople. He saw James, standing unmovable next to Clara. And he saw his daughter, who was no longer flinching under his gaze. She was looking right through him. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice cold with defeat. "The only regret I have," Clara replied, "is not doing it sooner." He climbed back into his carriage. Before it pulled away, he leaned out the window. "You are no longer my daughter." "I never was," she said. "Daughters are loved. I was a transaction." The carriage pulled away. Clara watched it disappear down the road, and she felt a weight she'd been carrying for 23 years finally lift. She was light. She was free. James turned to her. "You sure about this? That was everything." "I've never been more sure of anything," she said. The townspeople clapped. Moses grinned. "Welcome to the territory, Miss Clara." "Just Clara," she said. "No, miss." James took her hand. She squeezed back. The spring sun finally broke through the clouds. The land smelled like new grass and rain-washed earth. For the first time in her life, Clara was home. Late May turned the ranch golden. Wildflowers bloomed across the hills, a carpet of yellow and purple. Clara planted a vegetable garden. James built furniture to sell in town. They worked side by side. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. One morning, Moses rode up with a simple question. "So, when are you two getting married?" Clara blushed, beet red. James almost smiled. "We hadn't talked about it." "Well, talk about it," Moses said, grinning. "The whole town's waiting." They married at sunrise. There was no grand ceremony, no silk dresses or gilded mirrors, just vows spoken on the porch of the cabin they had built. Moses witnessed it, along with a handful of their neighbors. Clara wore a simple cotton dress she'd sewn herself. James wore his cleanest shirt. When Moses said, "You may kiss your bride," James hesitated. Then he cupped Clara's face in his rough hands, looked into her eyes and kissed her softly. She tasted like coffee and hope. Afterward, he took her to the place where he'd found her 2 years ago, the clearing in the hills where the snow had nearly buried her. "I didn't know who you were that night," he said, his voice thick. I just knew you were worth saving." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You taught me something, James. Worth isn't what you're born into. It's what you build." "Then let's keep building." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand. Children from the town started visiting in the afternoons. Clara taught them to read. James carved small wooden toys for them. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky crimson, Clara spoke. "Think we'll ever get bored?" James smiled. A real smile, one that reached his tired eyes and erased the lines. "Not a chance." She rested her head on his shoulder. The land stretched out before them, wild and beautiful. And theirs, Smoke rose from the chimney. The garden was flourishing. The cabin, once broken and abandoned, was a home. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the wind. She thought of the girl she'd been, caged, voiceless, desperate. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd chosen her own path, a woman who'd found a man worth finding. And together, they'd built something no amount of money could ever buy. A life, earned the hard way. One honest day at a time. James spoke softly, almost to himself. She came looking for the man who saved her life. He looked down at her, his hand finding hers. Turned out we saved each other. Clara smiled. That's how it works out here, isn't it? Yeah, he said. That's how it works. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe.